Islam in Sudan. The Islamization of Sudan occurred between the 7th and 19th centuries. Following the 7th century Muslim conquest of Egypt and 8th century conquest of North Africa by Arab Muslims, trade expeditions began being led into the sub-Saharan region, bringing with them the Islamic faith. Nubia, as the northern and central regions of Sudan were then known, had already been Christianized from the north. The Nubian Christian kingdoms fell foul to Islamic invasions. At the same time as the Ottoman Empire brought northern Nubia under its control in 1504, the Funj Empire had risen to power in southern Nubia. The Funj appeared to stabilize religion in the region, with Sudan being neither fully Christianized or Islamized. In 1821, southern Sudan fell under the rule of Muhammad Ali. Since then, there has been ethnic and religious conflict in the country. The Mahdiya uprisings between 1881 and 1899 can be seen as the origin of this political conflict and resulted in British control between 1899 and 1955. Racial and religious conflicts have arisen between the Arab Muslim North and the Black African Christian South since, and there has been intermittent civil war. The Sanusi are a political religious tariqa founded in Mecca in 1837. Missionaries of this order were sent into Sudan in the mid to late 19th century with the aim of promoting Islam. 97% of Sudan's 41 million strong population are Muslim, the other 3% being made up of Christians and those that belong to traditional African religions. Sudanese Arabs account for 70% of the population. The majority adhere to Sunni Islam and the Maliki school of jurisprudence. The population of Sudan is growing massively, with over 40% being under the age of 15.
The current interim national constitution of the Republic of Sudan came into force in 2005. The constitution adopted the Islamic Sharia and Convention as the sources of legislation at national level. It is noteworthy that the constitution explicitly recognised religious freedom rights in Article 6. The government of Southern Sudan was also established by the constitution along the same border limits which existed in 1956. It also provided for self-determination for the South through a plebiscite in which separation or unity would be chosen. In 2011, 98% of people voted for South Sudanese independence. The independence of South Sudan in 2011 was almost wholly attributable to the North-South religious divide. Northern Muslims dominated the political and economic system since the first independence of Sudan in 1956. Sharia law has been in and out of operation over the last half a century in between democratic governments and military coups. All three democratic governments since 1956 have all tried to abolish Sharia law. In September 1983, President Namiri of the Sudan Socialist Union imposed the Sharia throughout the land, eliminating the civil and penal codes by which the country had been governed in the 20th century. Family law had always been under the Sharia. Traditional Islamic punishments were imposed for theft, adultery, homicide and other crimes. No successive government has shown inclination to abandon the Sharia. Ironically, when the media ascended to power in 1969, his proclaimed objective was to stamp out the sectarian and fundamentalist parties. In 1989, the National Islamic Front implemented a strict Islamic ideology which continues to this day. 2 years later, the Criminal Act of 1991 introduced a new penal code in keeping with the strict ideology, including harsh Sharia punishments such as stoning and amputation. This act also introduced public order police to enforce these laws. In July 2012, President Omar Hassan al-Bashir said Sudan's next constitution would be 100% Islamic. This was designed to set an example for neighbouring countries, some of which had seen religious parties gain power after popular uprisings. Sudan's current democratic system and constitution is not compatible with a fundamentalist Islam and restricting rights to freedom of religion. Nevertheless, the current system remains far from 100% Islamic despite President Omar Hassan al-Bashir's hopes. Important Islamic practices such as the payment of zakat remain optional. President Omar al-Bashir has announced that he will stand down in 2020, having been in office for 31 years. There is debate as to whether this will be beneficial for the country. It will be interesting to see whether the new leader has differing views on the humanitarian crisis, which al-Bashir has dismissed as a significant problem.
There are lots of problems around us and the country is targeted from different sides. The Sudanese people are highly political. This job is very exhausting. But this will be my last term and it will end in 2020.
With regards to education, President al-Bashir has elucidated the importance of Islamic education with statutory reinforcement. However, there is no specific reference to Islam in the Public Education Act. The success of the revolutionised Faisal Bank in 1977 led to 5 other Islamic banks being incorporated in the 1980s. In the 1990s, the success led for the conversion of the whole financial system to be an interest-free Islamic system, forcing all banks, commercial and foreign, to operate with Islamic financial modes. In relation to Sharia courts, both parties must be Muslim and consent to the court dealing with the matter. Islamic law is then applied notwithstanding amendments by civil custom. In 1967, the extension of the Sharia court was a fundamental and controversial change, as the drafting of the Act meant that Sharia courts then had jurisdiction over Christian and Jews, but it has since been repealed.
The UN Humanitarian Response Plan estimated that 700,000 more people in Sudan this year will require humanitarian aid compared to last, bringing the total to 5.5 million. It suggested that $1 billion is needed to resolve the issues, with 1 in 6 children being malnourished. The National Islamic Front's campaign against Southern rebels saw them commit mass war crimes. In 2002, a civil war ceasefire was agreed and lasted for 6 years. The National Security Act of 2010 was passed to address these problems, but isn't compatible with international humanitarian standards. As shown by the worrying statistics emerging from the country, there is desperate need for humanitarian reform. The government must begin respecting the right to life and holding those accountable who have committed war crimes. They ought further to allow unrestricted humanitarian aid in war-torn areas. We must also see the release and end of torture of arbitrarily held prisoners. Violence against peaceful protesters must come to an end, and respect must be given for freedom of speech and association rights. The best way to implement these reforms is by legislative action and the ratification of international treaties.
There are 2 distinctive features attributable to Sudan: the prevalence of civil war and Sudanese wrestling. The causes of the 3 civil wars emanate from the failed British strategy to merge northern Sudan, which is Islamic, with southern Sudan, which is Christians and others, and treat them as one state. Eventually, after what was believed to be 1 to 2 million dead, the 2005 constitution and peace agreement granted South Sudan autonomy for 6 years, coupled with an independence referendum at the end. Currently, there is internal opposition to South Sudan operating as an independent country despite membership to the UN, as some of the population retain that still the Sharia law should be in operation. This form of wrestling and fighting was established by the Nuba people living in the Nuba mountains found within Sudan. These people primarily practice Islam but are known to practice other religions. The purpose of these fights is to demonstrate strength and prowess within the community and are often used to celebrate the planting and harvest seasons. The wrestling practice is spread to Australia, with Sudanese people practicing their homely traditions in cities such as Perth and Melbourne. Thanks for watching.